Hello friends, welcome to the fantastic world of stories and why we tell them from Culture Katha. As you've all seen, Indian social media has been abuzz with details of Operation Sindoor over the last few weeks. Details of the operation like the defense and offensive strategies India used, and more importantly the weapons used by India in the operation were discussed in threadbare detail on all media platforms, including all our WhatsApp groups. Weapons such as the Scalp and Hammer missiles, long-range air defense missiles, S-400, Brahmos, etc. became household names and part of everyone's lingo. Of course, war is not new to Indians. In fact, a treatise on warfare named Dhanurveda was compiled as far back as the 10th to 8th century before the Common Era. That's nearly 2800 years ago. Dhanurveda, considered a part of the Yajurveda, talks about warfare, martial techniques and martial strategies. Medieval period texts such as Shukraniti and Niti Prakasham also talk about weapons and war. The Indian epics, especially the Mahabharata, that is basically a war poem, also makes references to different types of weapons. These texts classify weapons into various categories depending on their mode of deployment. They can be mukta, a weapon that is hurled to strike a distant target, such as a spear or discus. Amukta, a weapon that's not hurled but used at close quarters while fighting a duel, such as a sword or a mace. Then Mukta Amukta, a weapon that can both be hurled and also used in eyeball to eyeball combat, such as a dagger, a knife. Pani Mukta, a weapon released by hand, such as a spear or a javelin. Yantra Mukta, a weapon released by a yantra. Mukta Sandharita, a weapon that returns after hitting the target, like Vishnu's mythical Sudarshana Chakra. And finally, Mantra Mukta, weapons that are released by chanting a mantra, like the Divyastras. Divyastras were basically divine weapons, energized by the powers of a Devata. The Mahabharata, interestingly, makes several mention of such powerful long-range weapons, such as the ones we saw being used in the Operation Sindoor. Weapons that could zip through the air and hit distant targets. The epic refers to these as astras or divyastras. For example, Agneyastra could burn like the fire god Agni. Varunastra could bring forth waters like the god of the waters Varuna, and was used to put out fire caused by the enemies or to drown them in water. There were special astras to create howling winds and storms, or to produce thunder and lightning, or to cause entire enemies to vomit, lose consciousness, cry, or laugh uncontrollably, or to even to put them to sleep. So how did these Divyastras work? Before the Astra was released, the power of the deity presiding over the Divyastra was invoked and made to descend on the arrowhead by chanting the mantra associated with it. The chanting of the mantra is what made the divine weapon more potent and powerful than any ordinary arrow. Interestingly, even a mundane, insignificant object could be transformed into a Divyastra using the mantra. Valmiki Ramayana tells the story where Rama once converted a blade of grass into a Divyastra. The Mahabharata describes these astras and their effects on people and their surroundings in great detail. Warriors unleash the power of the Divyastras and create major havoc in their enemy camps. Their divine weapons are several times more powerful than the other weapons, as they are manifestations of the inherent powers of the deities. Thus here we find that instead of wielding weapons, the gods themselves become the weapons of destruction. Just as modern day weapons cannot be used without adequate training, we find that in the epic too, only the most capable and the supremely valiant warriors were allowed to wield these astras. Even they could not attain these astras easily. They had to observe severe austerities and perform great penances. To be able to handle these powerful weapons, warriors needed to possess extraordinary energy and self-control. Special education and rigorous training was required, not just for acquiring knowledge of these special astras, but also for using them. As these astras were energized using mantras, knowledge of these weapons initially vested with the Brahmins. It was from the Brahmins that these astras reached the Kshatriyas, that is the warrior community. Very few Kshatriyas, including Rama, Arjuna and Yudhishthira, were considered competent to acquire knowledge of these celestial weapons. In the Mahabharata, we find Drona first testing Arjuna for his commitment and competence before imparting the knowledge to him. Interestingly, Drona initially hesitates to give the same knowledge to his own son Ashwatthama, as he did not believe that his son was competent enough to handle the powerful astras. A big part of the learning, as they say in karate training, is practicing restraint, knowing when not to use the weapon. There are three powerful divyastras that Mahabharata talks about in detail, namely the Brahmastra, the Pashupatastra and the Narayanastra. These were weapons energized by the Trinity gods Brahma, Shiva and Narayana or Vishnu. Of these, the epic focuses more on the Brahmastra, also known as Brahmanastra. It is the most famous of the Divyastras and finds mention in the Ramayana too. It's also identified as Brahmashiras at times. The creator god Brahma was believed to manifest himself at the head of the arrow, empowering the weapon. The Mahabharata sings praises of the powers of the Brahmastra. At the same time, the epic also describes in detail the terrible consequences of unnecessarily unleashing the powers of the weapon on the world. During the Kurukshetra war, Drona releases the Brahmastra on the Pandava army. The power of the astra was such that all visible and invisible life forms start to burn. The earths, the mountains and the trees begin to shake violently. Stormy winds start to blow and the seas start to boil. But Arjuna is not one to be scared away by all this. He counters his guru's astra with his own Brahmastra. At once, the fury of the wind and the seas subside. The world calms down and peace is restored. Thus we find that Brahmastra can be countered only by another Brahmastra or another equal or a more powerful Divyastra. The Mahabharata says that if such a powerful weapon is not neutralized by another equally powerful weapon, the rains will fail for 12 consecutive years in the place where the Brahmastra falls. The effects of deploying the weapon, described by the epic in chilling detail, does remind one of the nuclear holocaust that we all fear. The most infamous episode involving the Brahmashiras is when Ashwatthama deploys it with an intention to kill all the Pandavas. Arjuna promptly responds by deploying his own. However, because of peace mediation by Narada and Vyasa, they are asked to retract their weapons. While Arjuna is able to call his weapon back, Ashwatthama had not learnt how to do it. The Brahmashiras deployed by Ashwatthama is eventually redirected to Abhimanyu's wife Uttara's womb, killing her fetus, the last of the Pandava line. Thus we find that just as much as the Mahabharata glorifies war, it never fails to show us its terrible consequences. Friends, if you wish to know more about the Narayanastra, the Pashupatastra and other weapons of war mentioned in our epics, do check out my latest book, Gods and Their Weapons. It's available on Amazon, the link for which I have shared in the description box below. The book covers widely worshipped Hindu deities, Buddhist deities, Jaina deities and folk deities, and talks about the weapons they wield, their symbolism and significance, their history and stories. I shall meet you all again in my next video, where I want to share some interesting and unknown aspects about Vishnu's magical weapon, the Sudarshana Chakra, which I hope will help you appreciate why our air defense system was named after it. Till then, it's Tata, bye bye, take care.